Um, so I've actually had people ask me 3 or 4 times, what's a Quarren? Well, it's not the next animal you're going to see on an O'Reilly book. Not even one that will, you know, be on the shelf behind anybody that's in the room here. I got the idea, well, I'll explain a little more later, but I got the idea for this during March and April and really started refining it. And my husband is somewhat medically fragile. And so during this time of respiratory disaster for many people, he has been very careful. We've had to be very careful with him because basically if he gets it, bad things will happen, and we really don't want that. I'm kind of fond of the guy, so, you know, I'm planning on keeping him. So this idea came up during quarantine, and so there's where the name came from. I know, it's like awful bad joke. Flip to this, there we go. A little bit of a disclaimer, this is me speaking, not my employer Clearbuilt, not my family members, not even Jason, even though we're going to blame him later. It's not some nebulous community, it's not the duck, or anybody else. My day job is as a Perl programmer. I work for Clearbuilt, based in Atlanta. Jason and I work together writing code for lots of different business intelligence and business process automation sorts of things, and love doing it. I love what I do. I've been writing Perl now for about 18 years. Anything that I say that you disagree with me, that's okay. It's fine to disagree with me, even stridently, as long as you're nice about it. But this is just me speaking. So why and where did this idea for Quarren come from? Well, it's a content management system. Oh God, it seems to be a rite of passage for a lot of developers to write a content management system. And if you look on CPAN, or you look in, you know, any of the repositories out there for the different languages, you'll see several, and CPAN is no exception. There are several stubs of applications out there, and some of them actually work, and some of them even work fairly well. But they all were designed around scratching a specific itch for the person who developed them, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is, in fact, how most open source software gets written in the first place. So what's the itch I'm scratching then? Why me? Well, first, I have several sites that I manage. They're all very different. There's some possibilities of some others coming up in a few months. My husband and I are getting ready to move, and I'm going to be starting a blog because we're actually going on the road, full-time remote, live in a travel trailer kind of thing, and we're going to talk about it some. So, you know, and when in-person meetings resume, I mean, you know, I could show up at a Perl Mongers meeting. You just never know. I have a bunch of different sites to manage, from a single-page portfolio site at GeekRuthie.me to blogs, to Perl101.org, which is a bunch of static content that doesn't move around very much. And there's some other things that I'm working on, and some things that I am custodian of for friends and whatever who are not technically inclined. Now, kind of the default behavior is to pick a system and just run with it for everything. And WordPress has most of what I want. Now, WordPress would be kind of the de facto choice. It is the most popular CMS on the internet. It runs some large percentage of the internet. If you ask my former employer at cPanel, it's a double-digit percentage of the internet is on WordPress, which good for them. But there are problems with WordPress, and my largest problem with WordPress, I mean, it's written in PHP, and that's enough of a problem for some people. But I'm a polyglot. I speak a little PHP. I even wrote a plugin for WordPress once a long time ago. It's for Google Reader, so it's useless now, but I wrote that. And so I'm comfortable around PHP, and I could hack on it if I wanted to. My problem with the WordPress ecosystem is the whole paid plugin ecosystem that has grown up around it. If you find a good plugin, then it has this premium version that's going to spam your admin UI with ads constantly, asking you to upgrade. And if you find a really good plugin that's only a paid plugin, then you have to deal with another developer for support and integration and testing and upgrade, and that can be a real problem. And I have dealt with that problem off and on with different things I've worked on, and it just leaves a bad taste in my mouth, because too many times it's some youngster, sorry, my age is showing, it's some youngster who really hasn't learned how to be a civilized human yet, and I just don't have a lot of patience for that. And I really don't want to try to learn a bunch of different systems, because CMSs tend to be fairly complicated boxes. And so, yeah, you could learn the ins and outs of WordPress or Drupal or Joomla or whatever and get them breathing, but to do that multiple times, really kind of a pain. The question comes up fairly often, yeah, but why don't you use WordPress? Well, I've talked about that. You've got the skeevy paid plugin ecosystem around it. Joomla or Drupal, you know, I actually looked at these, and Joomla and Drupal are absolutely amazingly feature rich, but they are also amazingly complicated. This is the thing where this is why WordPress has way more installations than the other two put together, because WordPress, you spin it up and you're running. You don't have to spend a week figuring out how to configure it. It just works. I really didn't want to spend a whole lot of time sussing through and figuring out what Drupal and Joomla developers were trying to do. Wix and Squarespace. Let's not be silly. I'm not going to pay somebody for good web service. I'm too much of a nerd for that. Hugo. Lots of people love Hugo. I like Hugo for static content. But Hugo and Jekyll both have the problem that they don't handle search terribly well. Now, they're fine for static content or small sites, and, you know, since most blogs fail after 4 or 5 entries, hey, that might just work out fine. But some of these are sites with hundreds of pages up that I'm maintaining, and you need search capabilities. And both of these have a tendency to foist that off on the client through a big bundle of JavaScript, or else they're using some external thing like Elasticsearch and having to integrate that. And it's just complicated. It just gets really, really painful. You can do it. I've fiddled with some of it. I just didn't like how it came together. And especially on clients with really old, slow computers, it doesn't always work out like you want it to. So none of these really fit what I'm needing across a whole lot of things. So why am I doing it in Perl? Well, my native language is Perl. I've been programming in Perl for 18 years. I've made money in 6 different languages over the course of a 35-year almost career. But most of the money that I've made in Perl, and most of the development work I've done in Perl. So why would I add the overhead of learning something else? Especially, you know, some other language that a lot of the people that I hang out with, Jason, would be going, God, why did you do it in Scala or whatever? I use Perl and Dancer 2 and DBIC class at work, 40 plus hours a week. This is what I write. That's what we use at Clearbuilt. Is it the best? That's really a very subjective sort of judgment that I'm not qualified to make, and I don't think even the authors of other systems are capable of making it, because they can't be, you know, detached enough about it. I don't think there is a best. It's kind of like buying an RV. What I want might not be the same thing that you want, and so there is no one perfect RV. Same thing with this. I don't think there's any one perfect routing system for the web. I don't think there's any one perfect database system. There are some that are better for some purposes than others. And Dancer 2 is lighter weight than some of the other possibilities, like Mojo, for instance, or Catalyst. Dancer is nice and lightweight. You know, and it helps, I suppose, that I am comfortable with and familiar with at least one of the dancer core team. Kind of like the guy. You know, he's pretty swell guy most of the time, even though, you know, hockey fans, Southerners don't get that. And DBIC class brews in support for most of the likely database preferences that somebody would want to use with this. If you have a single page site and you're using some caching, it may be that SQLite works just fine for this system. Where if you've got a larger site, you might want to go with Postgres, or you might want to go with, God help you, MySQL or Oracle or something bigger. And DBIC class gives us that support brewed right in, so we don't have to worry about that, so long as we don't do anything too heinous in the database code. All right, so how am I going to go about this? Where do I go from here? What's the goal? Why am I doing this? Well, here's my goals. I want one CMS for everything I run. That's a big goal right there, and it's the core driver. That's the itch I want to scratch. One copy of the code per running OS. All right, you can do this with WordPress, but you've just introduced a whole heck of a lot of complexity. WordPress multi-site, for years and years, it was a bad stepchild that just never did seem to work right outside of WordPress.com. And for the rest of us, it was just a nightmare written in PHP. I want one copy. So if I install Perl modules, it's available across that instance of the OS. I do not want to have to deal with skeevy paid plugin shops. If you're working with CPAN modules, it's really hard to charge for them. And if you want your code released, you're going to put it on CPAN. I want it all on CPAN. And, you know, later we might make distro packages for apt and yum and other things, but start with it on CPAN, because that's going to give Perl developers in particular the opportunity to eyeball the code, to interact with it, maybe think up new ideas of their own and create more stuff in the plugin infrastructure. I want it to be mostly database agnostic. Now, if you try to interface this with Neo4j or some other NoSQL database, that's not going to be a good fit. But most of the SQL-ish databases we should be able to interact with minimal hacking around it. And I'd like it to be search tool agnostic. If you want to use Elasticsearch, or you want to use Lucene or something else, Lucy, if you want to work in Perl, there are possibilities out there. And it's entirely possible, and again, I use the example of GeekRuthie.me, a single page portfolio site. It doesn't need a search. I want to eliminate the overhead of searching stuff on a site that doesn't expose search to the user and has no need for search anywhere. I don't want to see features that I'm not using in the administration user interface. That's another problem I have with WordPress. It's got all these things showing on the left side of the screen, most of which you only use once or twice when you're setting things up, and after that, you never touch them. And then if you're not using file uploads regularly, it's just taking up space. So I want to see when the user goes into the admin side of this content management system, I want them to see the things they need to put content up, to put their content up, not somebody else's content or not, you know, something, but to have the tools they need and nothing more. You know, make the code as complex as necessary, but no more so, something like that. And there's some other possible fringe benefits. You know, if you spin this thing up on a nice big server somewhere, you could make a little money hosting for folks. Community, I mean, we have the fringe benefit for the community already beginning, because I'm here speaking about it. People from all over the country, and in fact across the pond, are here talking to each other and wouldn't have been otherwise. So the community benefit is something else for this community to do and talk about. The dancer community has grown in that way slowly, but I think there's value in that, and I think there's value in something similar. So to meet those goals, to meet that list of goals, clearly we're going to need something with a plugin infrastructure. And don't I look cute at the switchboard? So I've done some design work around the core of Quarren to kind of design the central bits of it. And the core database includes pages, users, and plugin infrastructure, and that's all, nothing more. In Quarren, there is no distinction between a page and a post. They're the same thing, they're both pages. Unlike in WordPress, where they're a separate entity, here they're the same thing. A page is a page is a page. Something's going to show up on the web. The default renderer and theme is to pass through raw HTML. So if you put raw HTML in the database, then the code will spit it up. And that's the default. Everything else, if you want to do something fancier, that's a plugin. So you can bolt that on later. The default permalink structure is to use slug, page title. So you just use lowercase with dashes instead of spaces, and take out semicolons, and you take out other punctuation, and you create a slug for it, much like WordPress does, and that's the default permalink structure built into the system. Very, very basic admin UI. I want to be able to modify pages, users, plugin infrastructure, and the system parameters that define how the thing works. That's all that the core admin UI is going to need. And the system should automatically pick off any plugins loaded on the system, and I'm doing that already through a begin block. I mean, when the thing spins up, when you start your worker processes, it's going to go look on the system and do, it's using plugin simple to find plugins and make them available in the database. It does not load them. And it also does not activate them. When it loads them in the database, in the plugin database, plugin table in the database, it sets them inactive. But the user can then go and turn on any of them that they need to and get the features that they need out of the system. So if you're using this in a multi-instance scenario, just activate the plugins you want for each instance. And you don't have to have bits that other instances are not using. I'm caching my system parameters, and I'm also caching pages. I'm using CHI cache for that right now. I'm not married to that concept, but it's functioning. And the beautiful thing about that is that it's nice and tidy and fast. And again, if you have a low number of pages, you could get away with using SQLite for your database with this, which then is super duper tiny. Because you don't have a running process or anything else. And I'm using text handlebars for template and layout of the admin UI. There was a Dancer plugin for handlebars, and there was a Dancer 2 plugin for Mustache, and I liked handlebars a little better than I like Template Toolkit. It's 6 of one and half a dozen of another one, but handlebars was interesting to me. It looked like you could do some pretty cool things with it. Reminded me a little bit of Hugo's templating system in that respect. You can kind of do some advanced things if you want to. So I implemented Dancer 2 plugin handlebars for this, and it has been released on CPAN. So that's available. I said everything's a plugin. Well, every plugin needs a namespace, needs a home of its own. Oh, wait a minute, one more thing. For UI toolkits, forms and grids and buttons and all of that, I'm debating, I'm still kind of chewing over using either WebUI or DevExtreme. We use DevExtreme at Clearbuilt. It is a paid product, but they do have an open source version for use in open source projects. And I have found it to be really, really, really handy to use in our work. You can spin up new things really fast with it, and new forms, and especially grids and grid layout things. It's wicked fast at doing that. So I'm still kind of up in the air about that. Haven't exactly decided. Okay, plugin namespaces. Core plugins are things like taxonomies. Things that have database tables of their own that are unrelated to the core tables that enhance the core in some way. So menus, sidebars, those kinds of things. Taxonomies, those are core plugins or things that you're going to use on the admin UI only. Page rendering. If you would like to render into something other than HTML for some reason, in order to dump out a website statically for something, there's a place for that. But this also is what's going to take care of capturing your shortcodes and using them, and this is also where themes live. Upload render. If you upload a CSV, how do we slice and dice that into something we could deploy on a page? Shortcodes. This is something WordPress has really mastered. You can just do all kinds of embedded content with shortcodes. We're going to do that. Themes, let's theme it. Let's make it so that the user can customize their theme once they've got it up and running. Cron, I've been asking around, and I haven't met anybody yet who really likes WP Cron. You know, if anybody here does, feel free to catch me after. You will be the first. I'll tell you that much. I haven't met anybody who really has no reservations whatsoever about WP Cron. It's a great idea until it's not. And a lot of systems leave it running in the every time we touch a page mode, run the crons, and their site gets slower and slower and slower and slower and slower because they don't realize you need to take that out and do a cron the normal way. So I'm up in the air about how to handle that. I don't want to fall into the same trap of WP Cron, but I also want stuff to happen on a periodic basis that we're going to need to happen. And search. And searching. Searching should be a plugin as well. If I don't want searches, if I don't need searches, don't show it. There are repos up. They're at GitLab, at GeekRuthie, Quarren CMS, and Quarren plugin theme bare pages. Very proof of concept. There's no admin UI yet, but it does run. It will spin up a dancer instance, and you can dance with it. You can stuff some data into the database using. I'm writing it using Postgres, but you could use pretty much anything at this point. I'm not doing anything database specific anywhere really. So it's still very proof of concept-y, just to see if I could get the main routes working. That was kind of one of the core ideas, was how do I keep from having to define a bunch of routes in code. So the non-admin side of this, the user-facing, the customer-facing side, if you will, is 2 routes. One of them is slash, and it's about 20 lines of code. And it checks the system parameters for a default page parameter. And if it's numeric, go get that page by ID. And if it's a URL, we're going to forward it to Megasplat. If the parameter doesn't exist, fine, go get all the pages in the database, order them by ID, and grab the first one. So if you only have one, you don't even have to define the parameter. It'll just do the right thing. And then figure out what this page wants to be rendered with. You could, for instance, create a render plugin for Markdown so that you could put Markdown in the database, or LaTeX, or whatever, flat text, or pod. I absolutely want to do one for pod, so you could drop pod in there. Call the render plugin to render the page to HTML, and then return the page using Dancer2's template and layout tools with the theme. That's all that the slash route does. The Megasplat route, 14 lines of code right now, which is, it stuns me how easy this was to get working. Call the permalink method that's chosen in the system parameter. The default is just the slug. And then go get the page schema object and then render the page using the page's chosen renderer, and return the page using Dancer's template and layouts. So where's taxonomies in all of this? Well, you have taxonomy might look like this. I want /author/Ruthie, which will show all the entities all of the posts, all of the pages written by author Ruthie. I want /category, which will give me a list of categories in some nice format that my theme defines. Both of those get picked up by the Megasplat route. And I'm going to use a before hook. Dancer has a wonderful hook system, and the before hook is, you know, I think they just made it for this purpose because it's perfect. Intercept that, give me the route, parse it against its own data tables. If /category is not a valid taxonomy, then it's a URL for a page. Treat it like a slug. And then, you know, 404 if that's not a slug. But if category is a known taxonomy, then if it's a taxonomy that the database knows about, build and send a page schema object using the vars tool in Dancer 2. So the /splat route looks for vars and looks for a page in vars. And if it sees it, it doesn't need to hunt for the page, it just does the thing. You could use this for all kinds of treachery. This is, the before hook is like, this is the magic that's going to make the whole thing work. If not, you fall through to the normal permalink handler and then render the thing. Okay, so where do we go from here? I spent some time this last week. I really had not done a roadmap. I really hadn't thought the matter through. I will admit that even after 30 years, I don't always do my due diligence of thinking all the bits through until, you know, I need to stand up and talk about them. But I did. So the 1.0 roadmap, the first functional supportable release of this looks kind of like this. First, I want to get the hard-coded schema out of that proof of concept and go completely dynamic. Obviously, if your plugins involve database tables, you're just going to need that schema to be dynamic because different instances on the same server might have completely different database structures based on what plugins they're using. It has no core admin UI. We need to install that. It needs that piece. I want to move the default renderer and theme out of separate repos. I want the defaults to be in core. So if you're just stuffing raw HTML into the page content, then you don't need a plugin, just it works. Tests. This is kind of like WP-Cron. I haven't met too many people that really love doing this, except for QA engineers. And my best friend is a QA engineer, and you know, she walks into a bar and orders 2 beers and orders -3 beers and orders, you know, a cat, and she's good at that kind of thing. She's really, really good at it. But I haven't managed to get her in on this yet. So test writing, I'd like this thing to be, you know, have a fairly robust set of tests around it, especially the core. Documenting what's there so far. There's some scribbly pod here and there in that repository. Ideas, thoughts, some of them don't reflect what's actually going on in the code. That needs to be cleaned up and documented. All right, and at this point, then you've got a system that can handle a small site with no searching needed, you know, where you're stuffing raw HTML into the contents. And this would be great for sites that don't change much, things like my portfolio site at highruthie.me. That would let it run and be supportable at that point. Okay, 1.02 roadmap, more permalink methods. WordPress has a thing for using the date in there. Some people happen to like that. I am of mixed opinions about it. I think it works real well for some blogs, not for others. But let's give the user those possibilities, and those go in core. Quarren plugin core menu for adding menus to theme pages with just put a little tag in the theme plugin in your theme pages, and then it just fills in the menu. And you have an admin UI to manage your menus like you do in WordPress. Quarren plugin core taxonomy. WordPress doesn't tell you this until you start digging. It comes built in with a bunch of taxonomy management, and most of the plugins that give you advanced taxonomies are just making use of it. It already comes with categories and tags, and if you're not using one or the other, you're stuck with it. You can't get rid of it. It's there. It's in your admin UI forever and ever. Amen. This way, you turn on and create the taxonomies you need and nothing more. And if you don't need taxonomies, again, portfolio or a small site, then don't plug them in. Page render Markdown, so that you can use Markdown in the database. So you could just create a theme plugin with all of your theming and your templates, and then use Markdown for your content. Page render file Markdown for Markdown files that live on the disk. You just name the file, and it uses that as the database content instead of taking it out of the database field. And Quarren plugin search something. I'd like to do the first search plugin at 1.02. I haven't decided which one I want to do first. My thinking is probably something that a lot of people are using, so that, you know, it'll help adoption. And Elasticsearch would be a good candidate for that. There are others, but a plugin for searching. Quarren plugin cron infrastructure and cron search to update indexes for the searching if you need that. Those are things that I want to get in there. We want to get the cron thing figured out and working at some point pretty early on, and at least one more theme plugin. And with this, then, you have, you could run a simple blog with this. You know, a single user writing their thoughts and jotting things down, and they're not uploading a lot of media. They're just kind of like a live journal almost. You could run that kind of content with 1.02. All right, 1.4. Quarren plugin core custom fields to add custom metadata to a page or a post, probably other things as well. Quarren plugin core custom CSS, so users can customize their theme without having to hack on the theme plugin itself. Quarren plugin data render, use CSV data to populate a page. I have on kind of the stub of the blog that I'm working on for Stephen and I's travels, I have a CSV of our bucket list, where we'd like to go. And I have Hugo kind of ingesting that and turning it into YAML and then populating a page with it. And I want to be able to do that, keep that kind of behavior, so that if I want to change that list, I just upload the CSV and the data changes, the page changes immediately. Quarren plugin core upload for uploading and managing files, handy stuff. Shortcode for gallery, I mean, that's an image gallery plugin would be a handy thing to have, and at least one more theme. And at 1.4, then you start to have a minimally competent platform. It's not beautiful. It doesn't have everything yet. It doesn't have everything WordPress has, but it's got enough that you could run a decent blog with it, which is going to scratch most of the itches that I have. So that's kind of the path, and then where do you go from there? Well, the sky's the limit, really, because most of what happens after that is plugins. You may need to touch the API on the back end of the core a little, but you know, just kind of add more as you need it. Most of the plugin system should be really well defined by then. You would think most of the plugin namespaces would be pretty well behaved. And the releases in Quarren proper are only needed for core UI changes. So not a lot of releases of Quarren itself after 1.4. Those would slow down quite a bit because you don't need to change that much. And then a plugin that's using some new feature like you know, core upload could specify in its CPAN file a minimum version of Quarren to pull up. With CPAN's dependency management, if the writers of plugins do it well, then they just need to specify what version of Quarren this will run under and any other plugins that will make this work better. And then from there, it's real easy to just install stuff. Other thoughts, some ideas. How about an analytics plugin, something that could pick off your logs as part of your cron, maybe? I really don't feel like stuffing all that into the database. I don't know that that's necessarily wise, but you could. Plugins for e-commerce. Gosh, you know, there's that before hook again. Would make a great home for an e-commerce plugin, and then you could have a shop and a store and send people off to go pay for things. A comment system, I didn't include that deliberately. WordPress's comment system sucks almost as much as WP Cron does. The built-in one just kind of stinks, which is why a lot of sites either turn it off completely or use something else. So some plugins to interface with some of those other systems like Discus or what have you. CSV or RSS ingestion, so you could pull in a whole bunch of bulk articles from somewhere else, or copy or create large numbers of articles ahead of time for advanced loading prior to publication. A cookie handler. I don't do anything with cookies. There's nothing yet touching cookies. I'm using Session DBIC right now, but you could do things with cookies here. There's all kinds of possibilities. And really, that's when it's time to ask the question, what do you do with it? What is the use case for a CMS, and what plugins would be needed to make Quarren do the thing you want it to do? And I mean, the whole time, this has been me scratching my own itch. And it just happens that it's a fairly common itch. Lots of sites need these features. So I'm going to write a CMS that'll give those. And then we figure it out from there. So I guess, that's when it's time to start asking yourself, hey, what could I do with this thing? And the other question is, do you want to? So let's talk about the community part of this. I think I've gained a reputation over the last few years as being kind of a community-minded person, more community-minded than I am code-minded in many ways. And that's not 100% correct, but it's not far, it's not a bad assumption, but I do spend rather a lot of time in code, just not 100%. I do care about our community a lot. I am greatly annoyed at a number of things that happen in our community. I have spoken at great length about some of those things. But I see Quarren as a possibility to build us another little piece. One of the great strengths of the Perl community, as I see it, having been involved now for as many years as I have, is that whatever your itch is, there's some place for you to go and scratch it. If you're a real fan of testing, CPN testers would love to have you aboard. If you really want to get down and dirty into the deep part of Perl, P5P is right around the corner. Whatever, we've got the Dancer community, we've got Mojo community, we've got Catalyst people. There's just people who focus on the things that they want to focus on. And there's no real overarching organization that says, this is Perl and this is not. They're all Perl, and that's fine. And so I see us building something like that here. I currently own QuarrenCMS.org, which I could route to the GitLab page or whatever, which would be a good place to stash, more extensive documentation. If somebody's a docs writer, by God, come along, because there's one of WordPress's great strengths. They have extensive documentation. A host for some mailing lists. Perl still runs on mailing lists, for good or ill. That's something we still do. Discussion board, wiki, someplace for discussing plugins. That could also be the issues on GitLab. Hey, I have an idea for a plugin, create an issue. that's a possibility. And a pointer to the Quarren channel on irc.perl.org, which exists. And a couple of people in the room are already there. Hi, Jason. Yeah, so we've got a couple of folks already there. I don't have, I mean, I put in a grant to try to get some funding to spend more time on this, and it didn't make, although I'm told it was a close-ish vote. And the results as posted were, you know, it was not everybody saying, that's a dumb idea, go away, Ruthie. It actually got some traction, but it didn't go through. That doesn't mean this isn't going to get written. You know, if all of the dozen or so people that are in the room here say, God's Ruthie, that is the dumbest idea I have ever seen out of you, well, you know, it's still going to get written probably, because it's still going to scratch an itch of mine. But I would love to have a few other Perl folk who are interested in something like this to come along and join the ride. So if you're interested, catch me. Let's talk about it. I am available for questions. If anybody's got any, you can unmute and pop right in.
When you were discussing your cookie plugin, what did you have in mind with that? Were you thinking something extensive like the, what is it, GPDR and those types of things?
That would be one use. You know, how many sites use cookies and what do they use it for? The sky's the limit. I mean, you could create ad tracking cookies once you have the tooling in place. It's just that the core doesn't bother with that at all. So you could use that for session maintenance to maintain a session longer than what DBIC/session would do. You could do that. What Dancer 2 session DBIC does, you could use it for that. You could use it for, you know, for good or evil. You could use your powers for evil. But this would, the plugin would mostly be, let's create the tooling to let them manage it. And again, I'm thinking of a before hook that picks off cookie stuff and hands it into VARs so that they can then do something with it.
VARs is pretty handy for that, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Ruth, forgive me if you covered this already, because I did have to jump out for just a little bit, but can you walk us through download, install, setup, get it going? Is that something that's ready, I guess?
It's a little rough around the edges. Right now, if you clone the repo, you're probably going to need a bunch of modules. I've tried to list them in the CPAN file, so hopefully, you know, you can use an install deps to pick off all your modules. But that may not be perfect yet. But then in the repo's bin directory, there's a bin file called Quarren, and you run it, and you tell it what directory you want to set up your instance in, and it works like Dancer 2 -A to create a new application. You tell it what directory you want to put it in, and it's going to create it. And then you go there and run the bin Quarren theme out of the bin directory in the repo, and it will hunt up all of the theme plugins that are installed, which right now only one exists. And if there's only one, it'll install it. If not, it'll give the user a choice to pick their plugin for their theme, just to get things initially started so you can spin the thing up. It's still a little rough around the edges, and that's one of the areas I want to document pretty thoroughly as I go.
Okay.
But those two bins that are in the bin directory are kind of crucial to setting it up, because one of them sets up the Dancer application, which you can then run just like every other Dancer app. Have you used Dancer for anything, Dancer 2?
Yes,
Okay.
I have. It's not a CMS, but it runs SQL queries and displays them on the screen.
Yeah, that's really all we're doing here. And so the Quarren bin sets up that dancer application skeleton and copies over the admin UI themes into the themes directory, which is where I put views. I called it themes instead of views. And, kind of sets things up and gives you a basic config YAML that's got most everything set so that you can just crank it. You can pull the starter, plaque up the app file, and you've got it running. That could use some refinement, but it's there.
Okay.
You do need to set up your database because early on it's going to ask you what database you want to use, and it's going to ask for the user paths and database name to put those into the config YAML for you. So, right now Postgres is the only option that's set up. But
so that's run from the command line, not from
it's a command line script.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a command line script at the moment. Like I said, the repository that's out there is very proof of concept-y. I just wanted to kind of see if I could get, like my theme handled outside of the app itself, and if I could kind of divorce the app itself from a lot of the bolt-on bits and kind of set up the basic of the plugin infrastructure. So it's a little proof of concept-y, and there's tables out there that won't even exist in the final release of Quarren.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I appreciate you coming by the channel. I saw you in there the other day.
Yeah, I actually just joined. I joined IRC through my Raspberry Pi, and we've had several power outages. So
I've seen you popping in and out of the channel. Yeah. So
yeah, that's why
you.
I still need to plug my Raspberry Pi into a UPS.
Yeah.
David has been asking me about this project from the moment that I mentioned that a CMS and Dancer was being done.
Yes, I'm certainly interested in getting involved.
Well, there's a couple of there was a project that ran, in fact, it had a grant for quite a long while to replace movable type with something else for blogs.perl.org. And they were writing something, and it was using Dancer version 1, Dancer 1, not Dancer 2. And it had turned into kind of a monster. I'm not sure what they were trying to accomplish, but they didn't get there.
There was a lot of external political and management issues with
that's often a problem. And for a while, some folks in Cluj were taking care of it, and I know Jeff, God rest his soul, was involved in that for a while, and the project and then it just kind of flamed out, and nothing has happened. Most of the other CMSs that exist on CPAN are variations on static generators. Most of which are there to scratch an itch that I want to blog, but I don't want to see a WordPress thing. I just want to drop a markdown file in the directory and it just works. Yancey is one of those, and it's fantastic. They're fantastic, beautiful things, but they do what they do, and I have a whole lot of needs to do. And that's the itch that I've got to scratch, is I need a multi-purpose CMS, not just one. All right, anything else? Going once, going twice.
What would you say the best way to follow progress would be?
Beg your pardon?
If we wanted to follow how things go along, where would be the best place to do that? IRC?
I would start at IRC, and you can always ask questions. For me, IRC is asynchronous. I'm using IRC Cloud as a bouncer, so if I'm not on at the moment, I'll be on, and I'll see that you were there. And, PM me, drop an email message. I'm really easy to contact via email. You can reach me at ruth@hiruthie.me. And then you can, find me on IRC and ask questions. The next few weeks are, I expect very little progress. frankly, as in 2 weeks from today, in fact, my husband and I are moving out of the house and moving into the RV, and then trying to get the house sold, and yeah, things are a little busy right now. But I'm hopeful after that, because the past couple of months have been pretty stressful as we've been getting ready for that. But I would like to see a 1.0. Okay, I'm going to say it, around Christmas. Around Christmas. I'd love to see a Christmas release of 1.0.
Yes.
But we'll see if that happens or not. You know, if I'm hopeful that eventually, you know, Jason quits having personal crises and can throw a minute or two at it, if nothing else, for me to bounce ideas off of him, because he's really good at that. So, you know, we'll see. But I'm certainly going to have a lot more time free starting, late September, mid to late September, after the house sells.
Ruth, it's an audacious project you got here.
I think so. I am really I agonized a lot over whether to, you know, it's that whole your scientists spend all the time trying to figure out if they could, that they never thought about if they should. I spent rather a lot of time over the shoulds on this one, and looking for alternatives. I spun up a Drupal instance and was fighting with it for about a week and never did get it to behave like I wanted it to. And I'm like, I don't need this kind of frustration. I'd rather write code that does what I want it to do. So that's kind of where Quarren came from, was that frustration with the single system problem of a disparate set of websites that I maintain.
Yep.
All right. I want to thank everyone for showing up. I appreciate you being here. I thank you for your time and your kind attention. And after we're done, go in peace with my best wishes for you and the people you love. Okay.
Thank you.
And I've mentioned this site several times in passant. There it is. And you can email me at ruth@hiruthie.me pretty much anytime.